one person asked me once, how can you prove that all of them aren't hostile? I said, well, I can't. You can't prove a negative. It's axiomatic. But I was asked this at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Let me tell you a little story that very instructive. So we're there, and there's a colonel there who was in charge of this operation at Wright-Patterson, and Bruce Ashcroft, who was an intelligence officer, although he was posing as a public information officer. He's really Air Force Intel, a suit. And so my military advisor and I, and another man who'd worked for the State Department and who was also a naval intel guy was with me. And so I went from the Rockefeller Ranch to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to this place where all this stuff from Roswell was originally set. And we had this meeting because it was forced on them by the head of J2, the previous one I briefed, my people briefed, Tom Wilson, Admiral Wilson. And when we got in there, we basically said, we're not here to get information from you because we know what you have here. We've already penetrated what's here. We're here to provide information to you so that you do not interfere with what we're doing with the 𝗖𝗘𝗍 contact initiative. So civilians are not caught in the crossfire between you guys and what you're doing with ETs. That was the purpose of the meeting, remember. It's very high stakes. The one thing I don't want to do is have a group of people caught in the crossfire. So not that the ETs would hit them, but our folks might accidentally, and we almost were hit at Mount Shasta a few years ago. Yeah, I'll tell you this story if you want to hear about it during the question and answer. But during this meeting, the colonel finally, at one point said, well, how do you know that these intelligences from elsewhere aren't a threat to us? I said, well, sir, given the galactically stupid things we have been doing, chasing them, firing at them, developing laser, particle beam, and other weapon systems, and knocking enough of them down that you've been able to reverse engineer them. If they were hostile, and they have interstellar transportation technologies, it would have been point, set, match, over in 1945, about the time we developed the atomic weapon. The fact that you and I are having this conversation and breathing the free air of Earth is abundant testimony to the fact that they are non-hostile, even if they may not be pleased with our stupidity. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that these civilizations are altogether in thrall with what's going on this planet. Who would be? Take a look around. But if they were overtly hostile, it could be over in a nanosecond. Because let me explain to you what the technologies are. Okay, all of you have looked at video games and Star Wars movies and Star Trek and other rubbish. So, okay, wipe your mind clean of all the rubbish that Hollywood puts out. Now let's get into some real science for just a minute. If you're going from one star system to another, I mentioned this earlier, you have the ability to create an electromagnetic field and go post-quantum, what Einstein called the spooky effect, where it's the same particle appears in two places at once, like that. And it has to do with non-locality in physics, the non-local cosmos, and other dimensions. But the power associated with that under a controlled circumstance is almost infinite. And if you were to take that knowledge and weaponize it, you could take a planet, target it, turn it into a pink mist floating through space instantly. It would not be a bunch of little laser guns going like this, like you're playing, So if these civilizations have gotten here, by definition, they're interstellar. And if they're interstellar, they're transdimensional. And if they're transdimensional, they have technologies that would make our hydrogen bombs look like a Tinker toy. All right? And yet here we sit, notwithstanding the fact that we have been using electromagnetic weapon systems to target them and knock them down since 1947. The Roswell crash was a targeted electromagnetic switch that knocked two craft down. They actually collided with each other. One went down near Roswell, one continued and impacted near Socorro. This is in an FBI document where it talks about a new radar system, that's a euphemism, that was turned on, and these two ET craft hit each other, went down. I know men who have operated the state-of-the-art ones that began to be developed in the 50s and 60s. And now we're 60, 70 years into what are called scalar or longitudinal electromagnetic systems, which are sort of electromagnetic pulses that instead of having a wave like this, are point radiation. So they're multiples of the speed of light. And this scalar technology has been worked on for the better part of 100 years in some circles, but certainly intensely for 70. So we have used those systems to track and target ET craft since the 40s. So if they were in fact so hostile, we would have known about it massively. Now, it isn't to say that they may have interests that run counter to the dominant paradigm on Earth. But what's the dominant paradigm on Earth? War. The dominant industry of the world, the number one largest, is war making. And still is in 2015, when we should have had world peace 100 years ago with the League of Nations. So this is a big question. And so they may be viewing us a bit jaundicedly and cautiously. And as one British intelligence officer told me, when we detonated the first atomic bomb, a big red flag went over this planet, and it was like kicking a hornet's nest. They became very concerned that we were reaching very advanced technologies and science that was instantly being weaponized and being used against one another. And that meant that we became an existential threat to ourselves, and in time, we, humans, could be an existential threat to other worlds. So that's part of the concern, and it's justified concern, because humans don't have a great track record. Now, this is only because the good people of the world, I mean, most people on the planet are not wanting to blow the planet up. I lived in the Middle East for 3 years. Most people, Arab, Israeli, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, they just wanted to educate their kids. I mean, if you get 10% of sociopaths who want to create trouble, your society is a wreck. And that's what we're dealing with. The good people have allowed the 10% or 5% of sociopaths and psychopaths to run amok, which is what happened with Hitler in Germany. So the good people have to find their courage. And that's our job, your job, my job. So I view this as something all of us have to do. It isn't, don't look to the President of the United States, as John Podesta said. And by the way, a little footnote on that, people think his interest in this was recent. It wasn't. After we did the National Press Club event in 2001, he publicly came out in favor of disclosure. This is the senior advisor to the President, Obama. And also, he was chief of staff for a number of years, 4 or 5 years, for Bill Clinton, during which time we were doing all this with this Project Starlight, which has been misnamed the Rockefeller Initiative. It wasn't Rockefeller's initiative, it was Project Starlight's initiative, frankly. So, but Podesta was always aware that, in a sense, what Truman and then Clinton said about the White House is that it's the crown jewel in the federal penitentiary system. That once someone is in that system, they're so in a box. And when he left the Obama administration recently, he tweeted out, which became this big uproar, about how one of his regrets was not being able to effect UFO disclosure. Now, some people thought it was a bit of a joke, but it wasn't, because there's a press conference in 2002 after we did our 2001 National Press Club event where he talks about disclosure and needing to end secrecy and release the UFO files and information. But his interest goes back to the Clinton era, before, because he was chief of staff for Clinton when we were doing all this work, prior to what the public knows as the Disclosure Project. Does that make sense? So he was also the POC, the point of contact, for Obama and for the briefing that's here that I provided after Obama was elected. And he assembled the Obama cabinet, did not immediately take a role in the Obama White House, but he put the cabinet together. He was the head of the transition committee between the election and January 20th, when Obama was inaugurated in January 20th of 2009. And there was a man who was doing a course with him at Georgetown Law School, who's an attorney here in town who wants to be anonymous, who said, look, you know, he's very interested in this, and you know, the president, of course, is going to be in the same situation they all are. And so I was asked to put together a briefing, and it went to this man for Podesta and Obama. Because Obama was, you know, looking to John Podesta as sort of his secrecy guru, because he had been a senator from Illinois or someplace for a couple years. He didn't know anything about all this. And he wasn't going to be told by his CIA director, Leon Panetta, because I sent this same thing to Leon Panetta, because he didn't know anything, being CIA director. So that's kind of my role, is to be the bridge between this unacknowledged world and that world when I'm asked to do it. And it continues. So last year, I was, about a year and a half ago, I was in Australia on an island with 120 world leaders. I was asked, the year before that, it was the Director of National Intelligence, who had just retired, who briefed them. And 2 years before, it was Bill and Hillary Clinton. That year, it was my turn in 2013, and I presented all this material to all these people in the world. So I continue to do this, and then my wife and I will send out packages of disclosure stuff to colonels and people in Switzerland and people at Davos, and you know, it's this whole networking thing. By the way, that's where your tuition is going, because these things are very expensive to do, and we have no funding. And no staff. Emily and I, just with some volunteers, do all this. Now, one of the things that you have to understand about these leaders in the world is that most of them are just agog when they hear about it. They go, oh, well, I'm Minister of Defense of Australia or whatever, and I've never heard of any of this going on at Pine Gap. And they're not lying. I said, well, no, you wouldn't. So it's sort of an unenviable thing to have to do, because I'm really the deliverer of very bad news. To have to show it to someone that powerful and say, by the way, here's what you don't know that you're being lied to about. But, so we continue to do that, but the big action, and that's sort of a service to people in government, because I view the good people, and there are good people in government, as victims of this secrecy, just like we are. Where they failed is in their constitutional duty to take on that machine. And that's where the courage comes in. And I think that's why we're going to have to view ourselves as the leadership, all of us in this room and the people out in the public who support disclosure. And the next wave of disclosure are going to be two things we're going to talk about after our break in a moment. One is a mass defection program. What am I talking about? We've got to network, tell everyone we know, and find another wave of people who are currently deeply involved in these covert programs who will approach me, and we will massively defect at once. Because even what I'm sitting on, there's probably 10 or 15% that's out in the public domain. Some people I've interviewed have asked me not to release it till they're dead.
Fantastic.
Okay? So that's the next phase. The other is mass contact. We have got to create teams all over the world that are skilled in the art of the CE5, Close Encounters of Fifth Kind protocols, who go out on a regular basis and create in consciousness, but also in action, the ability for mass contact to happen that's peaceful before this false flag creates the overlay. So it's a race. We're a race against the clock. And so that's how it has to happen. And that's something that you don't have to sit on your hands waiting for the president to do, or for that matter, me to do. That's something all of us can do.
We tried our CE5.
Yeah, and people who've done the CE5 initiative, even using the app, we get reports every day on our website of amazing contact and things that they've had. So if more and more people start doing that, the ETs are going to get the message that not everyone on planet Earth is sleepwalking. See, they need to see that. Now, people have asked me, Larry King asked me, why don't they just land on the White House lawn or their Super Bowl game? I said, yeah, they could do that. But all that would do would trigger mass panic, because these folks in the intelligence community would say, we're being invaded. We need to fight them. They know not to hit that tripwire. They want us to invite them and create the correct atmosphere of universal peace in consciousness and action to make contact. Then they'll come. We build it, they'll come. They're here anyway, even when they're invisible, because most of the time they're shifted beyond the speed of light and you can't see them anyway. This is what I'm going to talk about in LA at this workshop I'm doing in Glendale. But I think that's why, if we understand how powerful we each are, not only to find more and more mass defecting witnesses inside Booz Allen Hamilton and inside the CIA and Lockheed Martin and Skunk Works and Dugway Proving Grounds and Nellis Air Force Base and Pine Gap. And I have a whole list of corporations and facilities that I've updated of where these operations are currently going on. And we need to have people in those systems come out. Not trickle out one at a time with no credibility, but en masse, just like the '01 event, but on a larger and deeper level. So that's what I'm calling for now. And then the other is all of us becoming ambassadors to the universe as citizen ambassadors, peaceful contact. And that's something every single person can do in their own community. And if you do it and you practice it and learn what the protocols are, you'll be quite stunned at what will happen. It's beautiful.